The National Park Service, the Federal Highway Administration, the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the City of Chicago welcome you to this public hearing regarding the federal actions in and adjacent to Jackson Park. This presentation is pre-recorded and is available on the project website. It will be presented during each public hearing webinar, followed by an opportunity for public comments. Additional details on how you can provide your comments will be discussed at the end of this presentation. This presentation will cover the items listed here. It will begin with a discussion of the purpose of the public hearing. An overview of the federal process and the agencies involved will follow. The federal authority and purpose and need for each federal agency will be summarized. The project alternatives and the impacts of those alternatives will be presented. A summary of the project compliance with other laws will be provided. The presentation will conclude by discussing the next steps of the process. Following the presentation, an opportunity for public comments will be provided. The purpose of this public hearing is to provide an overview of the environmental assessment, or EA, and federal review, present the alternatives considered, present the preferred alternative described in the EA, describe the next steps of the federal review process, and solicit public comments. An environmental assessment was prepared to determine whether any of the federal actions have the potential to cause significant environmental impacts pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The significance of an impact considers both the context and intensity of the impact. The following slides will describe the need for the federal review process and provide an introduction to the federal agencies involved in the preparation of the EA. The proposed federal actions are in response to the city's decision to allow for the construction of the privately funded Obama Presidential Center, or OPC, in Jackson Park, and the city's improvements to the roadway network in and around Jackson Park. The decision to site the OPC in Jackson Park, the design of the OPC campus, and the related roadway closures in Jackson Park do not require federal approval or funding. The NPS and the FHWA ensure proposed federal actions meet all federal requirements and environmental laws. The federal review is being conducted jointly by the NPS and the FHWA. As noted previously, the National Park Service administers the UPARR program, and the FHWA administers the Federal Aid Highway Program. Each of these will be discussed later in this presentation. The National Park Service is acting as the lead agency for this NEPA review. The National Park Service and the FHWA will make independent determinations relating to their authority, but both will draw from the same information gathered during the NEPA process. The actions by the city will also require authorizations from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. The authorizations arise due to the proposed discharge of fill material into waters of the United States, requiring a permit under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and due to impacts to the Great Lakes Fishery and Ecosystem Restoration, or GLIFR program. Alterations to the GLIFR project require U.S. ACE permission pursuant to Section 14 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, commonly referred to as Section 408. Federal authorities and purpose and need. The proposed OPC project and proposed roadway improvements would impact lands currently managed consistent with the UPARR program. The UPARR program provided grants to economically hard-pressed communities specifically for the rehabilitation of critically needed recreation areas, facilities, and development of improved recreation programs. The federal government, via the UPARR program, provided 2 grants to Jackson Park in 1980 and 1981. As part of the agreements to receive funds, the city committed to maintaining public recreation uses in the UPARR grant boundary, or Section 1010 boundary. The UPARR grant boundary in Jackson Park depicts the entirety of Jackson Park, excluding the existing roadways and the areas occupied by the Museum of Science and Industry and the La Rabida Children's Hospital. The National Park Service reviews any proposed change within the UPARR grant boundary to something other than public recreation use. Any property improved or developed with UPARR grant funds may not be converted to non-recreation uses without the approval of the National Park Service. The purpose of the NPS action is to determine if the city's planned partial conversions meet the requirements of UPARR. In order to amend the UPARR grant agreement, the requirements stipulate that the conversion must, among other criteria, be in accord with the current local park and recreation recovery action program, and assure adequate recreation properties and opportunities of reasonably equivalent usefulness and location are identified. If so, the UPARR agreement may be amended. The need for the NPS action arises from the city's decision to close roadways, authorize the location of the OPC within Jackson Park, and improve the roadway network in and around Jackson Park. The NPS has determined that these city projects would trigger a partial conversion of certain parts of the OPC site and areas of roadway improvements that are currently recreational use to non-recreational uses. The NPS must ensure recreational opportunities of reasonably equivalent usefulness and location are provided to replace the converted areas. The FHWA administers the Federal Aid Highway Program, which makes federal funding available to state departments of transportation and local agencies for roadway projects. In Illinois, all Federal Aid Highway Program funds are administered through the Illinois Department of Transportation, or IDOT, through a Stewardship and Oversight Agreement. The Chicago Department of Transportation, or CDOT, proposes to use Federal Aid Highway funding for roadway construction and bicycle and pedestrian improvements within Jackson Park. The purpose of the FHWA federal action is 1. To address changes in travel patterns resulting from closing roadways in Jackson Park, and 2. To improve bicycle and pedestrian access and circulation. Specifically, the following needs were identified: poor intersection operations and congestion after roadway closures, lack of pedestrian grade separations within Jackson Park, and long pedestrian crossings of heavily traveled multi-lane roadways. The United States Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE, is a cooperating agency as part of this EA. The USACE is not a signatory to this EA, however the city has requested the USACE grant authorizations pursuant to their federal authority. An authorization under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act is required as a result of proposed discharges of fill material into waters under USACE jurisdiction. The actions that require Section 404 authorizations include the widening of the 59th Street Bridge abutment to accommodate an additional southbound travel lane along Lakeshore Drive, and dewatering a portion of the lagoon under Hayes Drive to complete bridge improvements. The USACE also provided federal funds for ecosystem restoration activities in Jackson Park under Section 506 of the Water Resources Development Act of 2000, which is known as the Great Lakes Fishery and Ecosystem Restoration, or GLIFR program. Certain actions that are part of this EA will impact areas previously restored under the GLIFR project, requiring USACE review under Section 14 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, also known as Section 408. Project alternatives. The following slides describe the alternatives that were analyzed for the federal review process. The no-action alternative includes the existing conditions in Jackson Park, subject to ongoing operation and maintenance. The existing National Park Service UPARR grant boundary is shown here in yellow. Existing roadways remain unchanged. Alternative A is evaluated as a baseline to compare against the action alternatives B and C. To replace recreation opportunities lost by the construction of the OPC, the city has identified a portion of the Midway Plaisance where replacement recreation opportunities will be developed. The NPS action is to determine whether the city's proposed replacement of recreation opportunities lost due to the OPC are adequate, and to modify the UPARR boundary. If the National Park Service approves the partial conversion, the city's proposed roadway closures would be implemented, and the OPC would be constructed, and the UPARR agreement and boundaries would be amended to include a portion of the Midway Plaisance with replacement recreational opportunities provided. This condition, as shown in this slide, also represents the FHWA no-build alternative to compare impacts of proposed transportation actions. Alternative C is the same UPARR replacement as Alternative B and adds transportation improvements to mitigate traffic congestion as a result of roadway closures in Jackson Park. This alternative also increases continuity between existing park areas with proposed trails and underpasses for improved pedestrian and bicyclist access and circulation. Under Alternative C, NPS would also evaluate and approve the conversion of UPARR recreation land caused by roadway improvements in exchange for replacement recreation opportunities where existing roads are converted to park space. The FHWA action only occurs if the National Park Service approves the conversion of recreational use by the OPC, the city closes roadways, and the OPC is constructed in Jackson Park. The FHWA evaluates the impacts of transportation improvements as shown here. Under this alternative, more parkland will be taken from recreation use for roadway improvements, resulting in further partial conversion. The National Park Service would evaluate the conversion of UPARR recreation land taken for roadway improvements and will review the adequacy of replacement land and recreational opportunities offered by developing the closed road corridors as parkland. Impacts of alternatives. For the analysis of impacts by the alternatives, environmental resources were identified. In keeping with NEPA guidance, the environmental assessment discussion focuses on key issues. Specifically, issues are retained for detailed study of impacts if they may be substantial, if they are of critical importance for decision-making, if they are expected to have different impacts across alternatives, or if the results of the study are expected to be scientifically contentious. Certain environmental resource topics were dismissed from further analysis as they do not meet the described criteria. The topics dismissed include agricultural resources, special status species, other wildlife and wildlife species, air quality, water resources, highway traffic noise, archaeological resources, and construction noise associated with the OPC. Further details regarding the dismissal of each topic are provided in the EA. The impact topics that were carried forward for further analysis include recreation, traffic congestion, cultural resources, social and economic issues, and the Great Lakes Fishery and Ecosystem Restoration, or GLIFR. The analysis of recreation as an impact topic includes describing the change of the UPARR boundary under each alternative, as well as the change in recreational uses and opportunities that would result from loss due to the OPC. Impacts of Alternative A. Under Alternative A, recreation within Jackson Park and the Midway Plaisance would continue under the current city ownership and management by the Chicago Park District. There would be no change to the UPARR boundary or recreation uses under this alternative. Impacts of Alternative B. The partial conversion of the area around the proposed OPC buildings in Jackson Park would result in lifting the existing UPARR requirements for recreation from a 4.6-acre parcel within the OPC site. UPARR restrictions would then be placed on the 5.2-acre site on the east end of the Midway Plaisance. The OPC site currently includes open space with paths that are used for walking or running, a track that is used for exercise, running, and walking, and an artificial turf field bounded by the track, which is used for playing football and soccer. The site also includes open picnic grove space that can be reserved by applying for a permit, a memorial garden known as the Perennial or Women's Garden, and a portion of the 62nd Street playground. At the OPC site, recreation elements would be reconfigured. Lost UPARR recreational opportunities here include the track and field, the picnic grove, and the open recreation space, including biking and walking trails. The UPARR recreation opportunities lost due to the OPC site, which are the track, picnic grove, and open space, would be replaced. The track would be replaced in a new location in Jackson Park. Several picnicking opportunities would be available across the larger OPC campus. Remaining recreation spaces shown would be relocated within Jackson Park, but are independent of the UPARR conversion. The function of the 62nd Street playground would be relocated and expanded to the immediate northwest of the current location. The Perennial or Women's Garden would be temporarily impacted by construction, but upon completion of the OPC site development, existing features of the Women's Garden will be replaced with a new design of equivalent size and improved accessibility. Opportunities for informal recreation would be created through new landscaped areas made available by the closure of roads on the site. To replace lost UPARR recreational opportunities, the city proposes modifying the east end of the Midway Plaisance to accommodate a combination of play area and open space. The majority of the east end of the Midway Plaisance is an open lawn lined with trees. This area has 2 mixed-use trails and a sidewalk. Within the open space are park benches, trees, an informational kiosk, the Cheney Good Memorial, and a wetland. The open space allows for informal recreation such as pickup games, walking, gathering, or open play. Sidewalks provide opportunities for walking and biking. Within the east end of the Midway Plaisance, the western side of the lawn would be altered with the addition of play area that would include both inclusive play and nature play facilities. New structural features would result in the loss of some open recreational space. However, the city proposes modifications to improve the recreational utility of this area. The sunken grade of the lawn area would be modified to facilitate infiltration and drainage to remove the wetland and to enhance the use of the open field. The proposed flexible open space on the site would accommodate a variety of activities, such as dog walking, picnicking, and holding soccer practice. The city also proposes to reinstall a missing historic walk and restore historic tree patterns on the site with the goal of rehabilitating historic spatial organization to a historically open character with corner plantings. There will be no alterations to the configuration of existing roadways or walking paths. Impacts of Alternative C. In addition to the recreation impacts of Alternative B, the analysis of Alternative C evaluates the incremental impacts to recreation changes as a result of the transportation improvements. The planned roadway changes would result in lost park space where roads would be widened or improved, and new recreational space where roads are closed and converted to park space. The areas of Jackson Park that are currently parkland within the UPARR boundary, but that would become roadways or sidewalks, generally consist of sidewalks, walkways, open space, or landscaping that serves as buffer zones for roadways and/or areas for informal recreation. The planned roadway widening and improvements would result in lost open park spaces used for informal recreation, as well as some sidewalks and pathways used for walking, jogging, and biking. These spaces are linear, narrow, and mainly serve as landscape buffer space between roadways and more functional recreation areas nearby. The conversion of these areas to transportation use would not prevent park users from continuing to use the adjacent open areas of the park for recreation. This slide summarizes the change in UPARR boundary acreages as a result of each alternative. Alternative B results in a net gain of 0.6 acres of UPARR land, and Alternative C results in a net gain of 6.4 acres of additional UPARR land. For the analysis of traffic congestion, travel patterns, traffic volumes, traffic operations, and parking supply were studied. Mobility at intersections is measured by calculating the average delay per vehicle and relating it to level of service benchmarks. Level of service letter designations A through F are correlated to quantitative measures based on the average seconds of delay per vehicle experienced at an intersection. A level of service A represents the best conditions, and level of service F the worst. Alternative A considers the existing roadway network within Jackson Park and projects traffic volumes to the year 2040. Existing travel patterns and travel times are anticipated to remain largely the same as existing conditions. Traffic growth over this time is anticipated to increase approximately 2.4%, concentrated on arterial roadways. Most intersections continue to operate satisfactorily. However, some intersections experience a degradation in level of service due to the growth in traffic volumes. As no changes to the roadway network occur under this alternative, there are no impacts to parking under Alternative A. Alternative B considers a scenario where the OPC is constructed and the roadway closures are in place. Due to the closure of Cornell Drive, travel patterns and traffic volumes that remain within the study area are diverted to surrounding roadways, primarily Stony Island Avenue to the west and Lakeshore Drive to the east. Traffic patterns shift to the remaining roadway network during the morning and evening peak travel periods. As a result of the traffic diversions, the remaining roadway network experiences substantial congestion and delays. 13 intersections operate at unacceptable levels of service. Due to the roadway closures, 128 on-street parking spaces are lost. Additional off-street parking proposed as part of the OPC development is provided to accommodate anticipated parking demand from visitors to the center and its employees. Under Alternative C, the FHWA may provide funding for roadway improvements to address congestion caused by the roadway closures. These improvements are concentrated along Stony Island Avenue, Lakeshore Drive, and Hayes Drive. Traffic volumes and travel patterns are dispersed among the improved roadways more evenly without overburdening one particular roadway. Alternative C would improve traffic congestion and travel times along all of the routes compared to Alternative B. Traffic operations and delays are comparable or improved compared to existing conditions. The roadway improvements in Alternative C result in an additional net loss of 21 on-street parking spaces. This impact topic focuses on the analysis of impacts on cultural resources under NEPA. An analysis under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, or NHPA, was conducted concurrently with but separately from the EA. This map shows the affected area of the project. The NEPA analysis's affected area for the EA is the same as the Area of Potential Effects, or APE, and was determined in consultation with the Illinois State Historic Preservation Officer. Impacts of Alternative A. No direct or indirect impacts on cultural resources would occur under Alternative A. As a result, no impacts to the characteristics of the historic properties that qualify them for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places, or NRHP, would occur. Impacts of Alternative B. Proposed UPARR replacement recreational improvements would result in impacts to the Midway Plaisance. The designed character of the sunken lawn would remain intact, and historic features would be restored, including a north-south path and historic vegetation patterns. The new playground would be designed to be compatible with the existing character of the Midway Plaisance. The NHPA assessment of effects process concluded that the effects on the Midway Plaisance would not be adverse. Reconfiguring the women's garden and relocating the track and field, along with removing roads and adding new pathways, would alter historic circulation patterns. Historic viewsheds would be altered by the OPC buildings. Designed topography and viewsheds would be removed for the OPC site development. Though the assessment of effects concluded that there would be adverse effects, the historic properties would retain enough historic integrity to continue to qualify for NRHP listing. Mitigation is under development through a Memorandum of Agreement, or MOA, as part of the Section 106 process. Impacts of Alternative C. Alternative C would have additional direct impacts due to roadway improvements. Some contributing features would no longer remain in their historic locations. Specifically, the Hayes Drive-Richards Drive intersection would be moved. The historic triangular design of the intersection and its design emphasis on the Statue of the Republic would be removed. The designed character of Marquette Drive and Richards Drive would be altered by changes to the design and location of contributing historic features. Material features would be lost as a result of project implementation due to the removal of historic roadways. These alterations would diminish the evident historic workmanship of Olmsted's design by altering the spatial organization of Jackson Park, and the historic property's feeling and aesthetic would be diminished. Though the assessment of effects concluded that there would be adverse effects, the historic properties would retain enough historic integrity to continue to qualify for NRHP listing. Mitigation is under development through an MOA as part of the Section 106 process. For the analysis of social and economic issues, the project study area includes portions of the neighborhoods of South Shore, Woodlawn, and Hyde Park. These neighborhoods are highly developed and include residential, commercial, recreational, transportation, and public and private institutional land uses. Population in the three neighborhoods in the project study area totals over 100,500 residents. Nearly half of the residents live in South Shore. Woodlawn and Hyde Park share the remaining number of residents with approximately 25,200 and 26,800 residents respectively. Population values for each neighborhood were established by combining data from individual census tracts within each neighborhood boundary. The labor force participation rates, which include persons in the labor force divided by population 16 years and older, in each of the neighborhoods in the project study area, fall below those of the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. Unemployment rates for the South Shore and Woodlawn neighborhoods for the 2013 to 2017 period were considerably higher than the city of Chicago and Illinois, while that of Hyde Park was below. Since no federal actions would occur under Alternative A, there would be no direct or indirect social or economic impacts. Alternative B would include temporary impacts to the community, such as an increase in short-term employment and public amenity improvements. Alternative C would include additional short-term employment opportunities from road improvement construction. This slide summarizes the overall social and economic impacts of the alternatives. There would be no impacts from Alternative A because no federal action would be taken. Under both Alternative B and Alternative C, construction will lead to an increase in short-term employment. In the state of Illinois, over 6,000 short-term jobs are anticipated during the construction and startup phases of the OPC site development, with an additional 2,700 long-term jobs during the operation phase of the OPC facilities. Alternative C would generate an additional 200 construction-related jobs for construction of roadway improvements. The Great Lakes Fishery and Ecosystem Restoration Project, or GLIFR, aims to create or enhance nearly 147 acres of native habitat within Jackson Park and along the Lake Michigan shoreline. The project includes 24 acres of new natural areas and the installation of over 600,000 native plants that will increase the biological diversity of Jackson Park and provide critical habitat and beautiful scenery for Jackson Park visitors. In addition, to improve access and circulation throughout Jackson Park, the project includes the installation of overlooks along the water's edge, new pathways, and the reconstruction of existing pathways on the wooded island. The areas included as part of the GLIFR project are shown on this slide. Alternative A represents the current conditions in Jackson Park. There is no change to GLIFR areas under Alternative A. Under Alternative B, permanent impacts will result from the construction of a new lift station by the Chicago Park District. Temporary fencing along the east side of Cornell Drive is proposed as part of this work and would result in temporary impacts. The Obama Foundation proposes to construct accessible pathway connections from the OPC site to the GLIFR pathways and replace the existing crushed stone screening covered paths with concrete, resulting in temporary impacts to the GLIFR areas. A total of 78 square feet of permanent impacts and 0.23 acres of temporary impacts result from Alternative B. Alternative C impacts are in addition to those observed in Alternative B. Under Alternative C, the widening of southbound Lakeshore Drive to the west would have additional permanent and temporary impacts to the restored GLIFR areas from grading and utility work. The proposed pedestrian underpasses near the intersections of Lakeshore Drive and Hayes Drive, as well as Cornell Drive and Hayes Drive, would also result in additional permanent and temporary impacts. An additional 1.32 acres of permanent impacts and 1.47 acres of temporary impacts result from implementing Alternative C. All impacts to GLIFR areas would be restored or replaced within Jackson Park. Areas impacted temporarily by construction would be restored in place using the GLIFR planting palette as a guide. Permanently impacted GLIFR areas would also be replaced on the east side of the Jackson Park Inner Harbor to the south of Hayes Drive, providing a net gain of 1.11 acres compared to the existing restoration area. Compliance with other laws. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, or NHPA, requires federal agencies to consider the effects on historic properties of projects they carry out, assist, fund, permit, license, or approve. If a federal or federally assisted project has the potential to affect historic properties, a Section 106 review is required. Additionally, Section 106 gives the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, interested parties, and the public the chance to weigh in on these matters before a final decision is made. Compliance with Section 106 is being conducted separately from, but concurrently with, this NEPA process. Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966, known as Section 4F, considers uses of park and recreation lands, wildlife and waterfowl refuges, and historic sites during transportation project development. Historic sites are defined as prehistoric and historic districts, sites, buildings, structures, or objects listed in or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. The law only applies to agencies within the U.S. Department of Transportation and is implemented by the FHWA and the Federal Transit Administration. A total of 41 properties are protected by Section 4F within the project area. Of these properties, 4 of the properties could not be avoided by the transportation project. Jackson Park and Midway Plaisance are considered as 2 separate recreation properties. As they are jointly listed on the National Register, the Jackson Park Historic Landscape District and Midway Plaisance is considered as one historic property. The Jackson Park Historic Landscape District and Midway Plaisance is a contributing feature of the Chicago Park Boulevard System Historic District. Thus, a use within Jackson Park equates to a use of the Chicago Park Boulevard System Historic District. The total use of Section 4F properties by the transportation project is 28.7 acres. Detailed descriptions of Section 4F properties and uses by the transportation project are documented in the draft Section 4F evaluation, which is available on the city's website. On April 22, 2020, the draft Section 4F evaluation was released to the officials with jurisdiction, or OWJs, and federal agencies with encumbrances on Section 4F land for a comment period that concluded on June 8, 2020. The draft Section 4F evaluation was also made available on the city's website for public review. FHWA will consider the comments received and complete the final Section 4F evaluation. The final Section 4F evaluation will be completed prior to, or concurrent with, the conclusion of FHWA's NEPA process. CDOT has requested a jurisdictional transfer of roadways from IDOT in response to the city's proposed roadway closures and resulting improvements to the roadway network. The following roadways will be transferred from IDOT to CDOT jurisdiction: 57th Drive from 57th Street to Lakeshore Drive, Cornell Drive from 67th Street to 57th Street, Stony Island Avenue from 69th Street to 65th Place, and Hyde Park Boulevard from 57th Street to 55th Street. Coordination of the jurisdictional transfer agreement is ongoing. Coordination is also ongoing between CDOT and the Chicago Park District regarding the vacation and dedication of public way in Jackson Park to accommodate the city's proposed increase in park space and roadway improvements to offset the roadway closures in Jackson Park. Next steps. This slide summarizes the next steps in the NEPA process. The EA was released to the public for review on September 28, 2020, marking the beginning of a 30-day public review period. The public review comment period will end on October 30, 2020. Afterward, the federal agencies and the city will analyze the public comments received and provide responses to substantive comments. These will be addressed in a public comment analysis report, which will append the federal agency's NEPA determination. A substantive comment does one or more of the following: questions with reasonable basis the accuracy of information presented in the EA, questions with reasonable basis the adequacy of the environmental analysis, presents reasonable alternatives other than those presented in the EA, and/or causes changes or revisions in the proposal. The NEPA process will continue as the agencies either make a determination of a finding of no significant impact, or FONSI, or decide to proceed with an environmental impact statement. As mentioned in the previous slide, the official comment period for the environmental assessment began on September 28, 2020, and will conclude on October 30, 2020. There are a variety of methods through which comments may be provided. The preferred method of providing comments is online via the NPS Planning, Environment, and Public Comment website, or PEPC website, at https://parkplanning.nps.gov/Chicago-Jackson Park. The environmental assessment is available on this site for public viewing. You may also mail your comments to the Department of Planning and Development at the address listed on this slide. Considering the current state of public health safety, and out of an abundance of caution, it is recommended that comments be submitted online, during a webinar, or by mail if possible. For those without access to the internet, and for those unable to provide comments using these methods, an appointment to speak with a court reporter in person may be scheduled. A court reporter will be present for collecting comments at the South Shore Cultural Center on October 15th between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. Social distancing and safety precautions consistent with city and state regulations will be enforced. Public comments will also be collected during each of the public hearing webinars for individuals who submitted speaking requests. The opportunity for public comments will follow this presentation. The preferred method of providing comments is online via the NPS PEPC website. All comments received are treated equally, regardless of the method through which they are submitted. Duplicate comments by the same individual will be disregarded. This concludes the presentation. The National Park Service, the Federal Highway Administration, the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the City of Chicago thank you for your time and input regarding this project. At this time, during each of the public hearing webinars, the opportunity for public comments will begin.